Now it is? Okay. Okay, to skin the head, what we want to do is skin over the head. We've got the neck, and we're going to invert. This is a quail. So quail and pheasants, a crow, we can probably invert the skin over the head because the head isn't larger than the neck itself. So what we do is we hold the neck and we carefully move the hide down. Now if the hide sticks, then you should use a scalpel to carefully cut behind the leading edge of the skin. You don't want to cut on the skin. And with the quail, if you're very careful, it moves fairly easily. And as you go down over, you're going to see where the hide sticks to the ears. It comes back to a little V. There's a little point where it looks like the hide is stuck and it won't remove. Right at that point, you actually cut right on the hide, right behind this little tip, and it makes a hole where the ear canal is. And once you've made that incision, then the skin will continue to go past that. And those of you that are up close can probably see that there's a hole. It looks like there's a hole in the hide. If you flip it over to the other side, the same thing is going to be true. The hide is moving down towards the beak, but it will not move far enough. So you cut right over the top of the skin and the ear releases, and then the hide will move down towards the eye. Once you start to see the eye ball, and you can see it right here, then what I'd like you to do is make sure you stay behind that leading edge of the skin quite a bit and pull on the hide and cut behind the leading edge of the skin until you see a little hole or opening. And that opening is right where the eyelids are attached to the eyeball. And you want to be very careful not to cut the eyelids or cut around the eye opening. And you want the skin to go all the way down to the beak. So right now what we have is we have a little hole here where that's the eyelids, and you can see the entire eye and the iris part of the eye. So we continue to pull on the hide and gently skin it down towards the bill. And you want to skin it down until you can see the edge of the bill. So you want it to release on the front part of the eye ball itself. Without putting any other holes in the hide. So there we can see the eyeball, we can see the beginning of the bill, and we can see the eyelids. When you're down that far, then what we need to do is flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. And again, we can see the eyelids if we're careful and cut behind the leading edge of the skin. And as we pull against it and skin it down, we can start to see the edge of the bill or the beak. At this point then, we're going to save the skull, but we're going to get rid of any other tissue that might decay in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and make an incision on each side of the lower part of the skull, and we're going to carefully remove the tongue. So we go underneath this and we put our thumb on it and we pull up, and there is the tongue of the bird. Then we also want to get rid of the neck off the back of that. So we detach the neck and get rid of the neck, and then the eyeballs need to come out of their sockets and the brains need to come out of the back of the skull. And to do that, what you need to do is find an opening called the foramen magnum, and you'll be able to see a little bit of white tissue, which would be where the spinal cord comes out of the skull. And where that hole is, that's too small to remove the brains from. So you need to make an incision, a little V-shaped incision through that hole, and then enlarge that hole enough to put some tissue in and remove the brains from the brain cavity. And the easiest way to do that is to take a little paper toweling and roll it up and force it into the cavity. And if you use a blunt probe, to push that in there, because we want to preserve the skull, but we don't want the brain tissue or anything inside the skull that would rot and spoil over time. So what you do is you carefully push some paper toweling into the brain cavity and then remove it, and it will remove with it any of the tissue inside there that needs to be taken out of the skull itself. And you can use a blunt probe to push it in there. On larger birds, you can do the same process. Using a blunt probe just to push in there, and then when you take it back out, it'll remove the tissue with it so that you don't have any brain tissue left in there. And then what we'll do is we'll put borax over the skull and in the skull to make sure that it all dries out. To remove the eyes out of the eye socket, you take a blunt probe and move it all the way around the eyes to dislodge the connective tissue, and then just remove the eye from the socket so that the eye socket is open. We'll take clay and we'll fill the eye socket with clay and then put artificial eyes in place of where the eyeballs themselves were before. So at this point, the head is skinned all the way down to the beak, and the eye sockets are open and the brain cavity is cleaned out and any extra tissue is taken off of the brain.